I keep being reminded, believe nothing and consider everything. And honestly, that's just where we are with this Penn State head coaching search.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football, and as always, thank you so much for checking out another edition of Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling, and we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcasting network out there. We got plenty to get to in this show. Does Penn State get its first Big Ten Conference win? Well, Michigan State might have a trick up its sleeve to prevent the Nittany Lions from retaining the land-grant trophy. That's what everybody cares about here. We're going to go through Penn State's best coaching options because there are a lot of them out there. But as I reiterate, believe nothing, consider everything. And that's what we're going to do here. Where things actually stand with Penn State's head coaching search, what's being reported, what's being speculated, all of it in this episode. Friendly reminder to let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. But all names are on the table because that's what Penn State is doing. Penn State is not narrowing its search. It's actually expanding its coaching search. So that's what is true. So you're going to see names like Brian Daboll now in the mix, ex-New York Giants head coach. Well, I don't agree with that. You might not. But this is what Penn State is trying to do. Again, they set out with the intention to win national titles, and you do not fire James Franklin in the middle of the season to settle. You are going to try to hit the home run at all costs. Does that mean waiting out potentially Mike Elko and Kalen DeBoer of Texas A&M and Alabama, respectively? I also want to remind everybody, extensions have not been signed. Other than Curt Cignetti and Matt Rule, why haven't any other programs taken the liberty to go and settle a long-term extension with a coach that they value? Okay, Jeff Brom at Louisville, they're working on it, right? Again, that doesn't mean anything until something is actually signed. Well, somebody signed an extension a year ago. Somebody signed an extension 2 years ago. Okay, but if places like, let me point out Texas A&M for an example. If Mike Elko is so valued and Texas A&M is sitting on all this oil money, why haven't they gotten an extension done? They're undefeated. They're one of the favorites to make the college football playoff championship, the national title. And yet, so what is the reason for kicking the can down the road? Because Curt Cignetti in Indiana got an extension done immediately after the Penn State job opened up. Okay, that's all I'm all here to say. Consider everything. So Penn State, I know this, they are willing to wait out a situation like that. If Texas A&M and Mike Elko can't get a deal done, Penn State is not afraid because that's the home run hire. That was the declaration that Pat Kraft made. So those names, even though, well, they're not necessarily realistic and logistically, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm here to say that Penn State is willing to take that risk. They don't want to settle. Mike Elko, Kalen DeBoer, Brian Daboll is an ex-NFL head coach. He is going to be considered. But other names as well. I mean, Brent Key, Jeff Brom, Georgia Tech and Louisville, respectively. Bob Chesney of James Madison. Brian Hartline, Ohio State offensive coordinator. So this search is not narrowing. It is actually being widened at this point in time. It's been officially reported as of today by The Athletic that, yes, Penn State is interested in Brian Daboll. I got a text from a source just the other day. Now, what the actual situation is still to be determined. But I got a tip that says that Brian Kelly, whether it's Michigan State or Penn State, that there's something there. Maybe that's not Penn State's favorite option, but something is there. Again, a source wouldn't reach out to me to say, hey, just so you're aware. I think that's pretty telling. So, and here's kind of a fun one off the wall, because it gets me thinking when we have these conversations. There's people that are saying, well, USC and Lincoln Riley aren't totally content with one another. Okay. Lincoln Riley's only being linked to LSU. Again, what does that domino effect look like? If one coach, if there is that surprising hire in the cycle, whether that's LSU or Florida or anywhere else, where a domino effect happens, and then it leads a coach to take a USC job if it becomes open, and then another coach is displaced in the process, and then they become a more realistic candidate for a Penn State or something like that. Or heck, maybe, again, why do we have the information that we have? Because I feel like there is so much. Initially, it was Matt Rule is the leading candidate here. And that didn't happen. He's re-signed now with Nebraska. It's kind of the same thing right now with Eli Drinkwitz. Okay, Eli Drinkwitz, again, I had a source that told me, hey, this is the leading candidate in the search process. Okay, and it seems like that's been confirmed across the board of other people that are reporting the same thing. He might be a realistic candidate for Penn State, but then when I talk to my counterpart over at Locked On Mizzou, they're surprised. Honestly, that was the reaction that, I didn't think that there wasn't a situation where Drinkwitz was going to go to Penn State, or at least it wasn't considered as serious. So it's interesting how this conversation carries on, that I'm sitting here anticipating that Eli Drinkwitz is going to be the guy, and that he's going to be the next head coach of Penn State. I don't know how I really feel about that hire, because why do you fire James Franklin in the middle of the season to get somebody like Drinkwitz, who I don't know how much upside that he offers? And per people that are connected in Missouri, that are in the heart of Missouri, well, yeah, it was a consideration, but we didn't think it was that serious right now that he would leave Mizzou for Penn State. So it's just interesting to me. A couple other names that have been thrown out there: Pat Fitzgerald, former Penn Stater; Al Golden, current Bengals defensive coordinator. And with respect to Brian Daboll and Al Golden, as I mentioned, those kinds of names, they're failed, they're not going to succeed, those would be terrible hires for Penn State. You never know. Ohio State and Matt Patricia. I get it. Matt Patricia is a defensive coordinator, so it's a little bit of a different circumstance. But he was that failed NFL coach, so to speak. And look at the success he's having. Some people just need a change of scenery. Some people just need a reset. NFL coaches who do not succeed at that level don't automatically fail in college, is the point I'm trying to make. Whether these are, again, not the standard, they are the exception. But I think of Nick Saban and Pete Carroll. And how about current coaches? Lane Kiffin was a coach of the Oakland Raiders and then settled back into college football. And now he is a premier, he's one of the premier coaches that LSU is going to target, and Florida. Because again, why isn't an extension done? Why hasn't why hasn't Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin come to an extension at this point in time? That's what I mean. So until these programs, these prominent programs, and these coaches have an extension done, they are in the running for any of these head coaching jobs. This extends past Penn State, LSU, Florida, all of the prominent programs that are open, Auburn. They are all candidates until they sign with a respective program or re-sign with the one that they're currently at. And why are you kicking the can down the road? This coach it's a done deal. You don't need to worry about it. There's no chance. No, there is a chance, because Penn State is willing to wait out Mike Elko in a playoff run, Kalen DeBoer in a potential playoff run. Why? Because that's the home run. That's the grand slam hire that was alluded to, again, when Penn State made this decision. You do not fire a successful head coach in the middle of the season to settle or to take a step backwards. Penn State is going to continue to do its due diligence. There are going to be, again, I don't think, if you want my opinion right now, I don't know that we're going to have a new Penn State head coach by the end of this month. That's a couple of weeks away, because the anticipation was, at least a few days ago, that Eli Drinkwitz or somebody would have been hired by Penn State at the end of the regular season after Thanksgiving. That's the anticipation. Well, that doesn't need to be the case. So Penn State can still go after its best option. And again, based on how these interviews go, maybe Eli Drinkwitz is. Maybe Pat Kraft sits down with Drinkwitz or anybody else and says, we don't know how these meetings go. But Penn State is going to interview these candidates. They're going to have conversations. They're going to continue to have this search completely wide open. Again, I think it's widening. It's definitely not narrowing at this point in time. So with that being said, with all of the candidates that I've listed here, what does the actual coaching board look like at this point? How would we rank them? Who are the best candidates for Penn State and why? That is coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. This episode is brought to you by DoorDash. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Now let's break it down. For Penn State, I'm going to go with Ethan Grunkemeyer because he delivered in a big way. And I know it was a losing effort. I know they didn't get the win against Indiana. But for Grunk to have the first half that he had, he could have easily folded. That game could have easily been out of reach for the Nittany Lions. And instead, they continued to fight. They scratched. They clawed their way back against Indiana. And I know it was a miracle walk-off victory, but Grunkemeyer kept them in the game. Had the early interception in the second half. And then for him to bounce back, to go 22 of 31, complete over 70% of his passes, over 200 yards, all of which have been the first for his career with a full game, and throw another touchdown pass and just have big explosive plays in the passing game. Ethan Grunkemeyer stepped up and delivered and put Penn State in a position to win that game, even though it didn't happen. But he delivered, and if you've been following along, you know that this performance is not a fluke. And just like Grunk delivered for Penn State, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays with DoorDash streaks. You save every Saturday you order. Stack it up all season. You could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day. Only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. Since we're considering everything, it means we have to reshuffle the rankings with Penn State's best options. I don't care how realistic or how likely or how unlikely. I want to rank Penn State's options given that, now Brian Daboll's in the mix. And yeah, for better or for worse, Al Golden should be a consideration. Again, it's not working out with the Cincinnati Bengals. Have you seen that roster? Have you seen that defensive roster for the Cincinnati Bengals? Nobody could be a defensive coordinator there and have it work. He was great at Notre Dame. Okay. So no, that's not my argument here to say that Al Golden is a top 3 candidate, but again, worth considering if his vision aligns with what Penn State wants to do. So which candidates would be best? I am going to stay consistent with this. I've said all along, I don't care how unlikely it is. If it's 1%, if it's 5%, if it's 10%, I know that Penn State is willing to wait this out if need be. And why they're willing to wait it out is because, again, you have the luxury of the transfer portal. You can do this. Mike Elko at Texas A&M is their number one choice. Until he is extended by Texas A&M, he is going to be worth considering. And I know, there's the news that the board met and everything else. Again, until it is finalized, until I see a headline that says Texas A&M re-signs Mike Elko, he is a Penn State coaching candidate. He is a coaching candidate anywhere to this point in time. Again, LSU is a prominent program. They're going to make a phone call if they believe that he's a realistic candidate, but it's to each their own. And when we're talking about Mike Elko, he's from New Jersey. He graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. He is from the Northeast. He grew up in this part of the country. So Penn State very well might be his dream job. He's a defensive-minded coach. He's the best. I think he's the best overall, one of the best overall coaches in all of college football right now. You still need to be, I get it, Penn State, maybe they need to go in an offensive direction because, quarterback, wide receiver, it's just been a struggle to pass the football. Well, Mike Elko, again, you can hire a really good offensive coordinator. I still think defense needs to be valued in the Big Ten. So if you're going to get an elite defensive mind that Mike Elko is, then yeah, the rest will take care of itself. So he can recruit. He knows how to work the transfer portal. He's proven that he can win at every single level, whether that's at Duke, whether that's at Texas A&M, and he wins immediately. I'm also willing, and I know that Penn State would be too, to punt on the class of 2026 and the transfer portal in the short term if you get Mike Elko. Because you can fix all of these problems with the transfer portal the next time around. And who's to say, I'm not saying the entire roster is not going to follow Elko to State College from Texas A&M if that were to happen, but a good amount of players probably would. So that's worth considering. That's why Penn State wants to go with the head coach and why Brian Hartline is still on this list, but I'll get to him in a moment. Kalen DeBoer is also would be that second choice. Don't care if it's realistic or not. Kalen DeBoer would be the number 2 hire on this list because of what he has accomplished. And honestly, you could make the argument, I would say it's a 1A, 1B between Mike Elko and Kalen DeBoer. I like that Elko has ties to the Northeast. Kalen DeBoer seems more like a mercenary in college football. But again, Nick Saban became the greatest coach of all time at Alabama and had no roots at Alabama. Kalen DeBoer, okay, so maybe it's a similar thing. But it seemed like Alabama fans were ready to run him out of town immediately. The guy wins. The guy knows how to recruit. When you can take Washington, the Washington Huskies, to a title. I know they lost to Michigan, but you took Washington to a national championship. You drop down into Alabama, you still win consistently, right? You don't have a drop off. They don't fall under 500 or anything like that. They didn't have a losing season in year 1, but they could have been better, right? I understand the frustration, especially coming off the tenure of Nick Saban. But Kalen DeBoer circles the wagons, and in year 2, they're a national title contender. Alabama is back where they're used to, being in title contention at the top of the SEC. If everything's so great, why haven't Alabama and Kalen DeBoer agreed to an extension? Now, I know he's paid it. This is a different conversation. Mike Elko is making $7 million per year. Kalen DeBoer is making $10 million per year and already has a pretty substantial contract. Elko's due a raise, but if Alabama has all this money and they're one of the greatest football programs, and why would you want to leave Alabama for Penn State? Okay, then wouldn't he be due a raise? Wouldn't he be due an extension? Again, Curt Cignetti was in year 2 of his deal with Indiana. An extension taken care of. Pay raise justified. Why is everybody else kicking the can down the road? I see Marcus Freeman still loosely. Again, he's being considered by the New York Giants, and I don't see him leaving Notre Dame for Penn State. But again, I do want to point out that he hasn't said no to anybody, okay? Then I'm going to go with Jeff Brom as the number 3 candidate on my list. Louisville grad, it's going to be tough to actually get him away, and now there are reports that they are discussing an extension to retain him there. So I understand how it looks, but still, objectively, he is probably that next best option. Penn State, they couldn't win the big game. Well, Jeff Brom wins the big games. He was 3-1 against top 5 teams at Purdue of all places. And then down in Louisville this season, upset number 2 Miami of Florida. And you could make the argument that he sent their season off track. He sent them in a downward spiral. Well, give him the resources, give him the infrastructure, give him the support to go do that on a consistent basis. Jeff Brom knows how to win big games. Penn State and James Franklin couldn't do that together. That is I've talked about in this coaching search, you want somebody that gives you elements that James Franklin did not have, which is why I'm a little hesitant to say, okay, Eli Drinkwitz should be the guy. I think he's a good coach. I don't know if he's better than James Franklin. But when you look at somebody like Jeff Brom, he has an element of coaching that you can see right away that, okay, Penn State hasn't had this. in these big moments, in these elite matchups, when Penn State may not necessarily be favored or when it's a level playing field. Because that was the thing with Penn State. When it was a level playing field or they were a slight underdog in a big moment, you knew they were going to lose. That was the problem. When Jeff Brom's coaching, none of that is considered. All things are a possibility here in a big moment for Jeff Brom. So he is a really good coach, and I think with Penn State's resources would be able to succeed. And then I got to go with Brian Hartline because of the upside. Again, similar situation with Brom, not in the big game respect, but getting something that James Franklin and this coaching staff did not have over the better part of a decade. You have somebody with clear NFL, with NFL connections, played in the NFL for a long time, and the recruiting, the developing. Penn State hasn't had that, where they can just go and get any wide receiver because they know look at Brian Hartline sending first round pick after first round pick after first round pick to the NFL draft. I'm not here to say that they're going to get every single 5-star wide receiver or quarterback, but there is going to be a desire to follow Brian Hartline because of his track record with developing players and getting them into positions to succeed and be ready for the next level. Now that's at Penn State. So I'm willing to take that risk. Well, he doesn't have any head coaching experience. Okay. Neither did Dan Lanning. Neither did Marcus Freeman. Those guys are the exception, not the standard, but you're not going to know until you take a chance on Brian Hartline. I'll finish with this. I am intrigued by the idea of Brian Daboll. Sometimes you just need a change of scenery. I don't think he's a bad coach. New York's a tough place to win in. We saw he was successful at helping develop Josh Allen. Those Buffalo Bills offenses were humming along, which is why he got the head coaching job in New York. Do we just forget about all of that? Again, Matt Patricia was a cast-off in the NFL. Settles back in, and now he's coaching the number 1 defense at Ohio State. Sometimes you just need a change. You just need a reset. He has family ties to Penn State. They're going to consider him. Pat Kraft is going to consider him. He's most likely going to interview him at some point in time. But it is definitely worth considering. When college football is becoming a lot more like the NFL, somebody like Daboll, who is a free agent, is definitely worth considering. And because he's coached in the NFL, and the objective of most college football players is to get to the pros, so go get a pro coach. And then there's that allure that, I can go work alongside an NFL coach with NFL connections. So you never know, but it's worth having a conversation of how he hasn't been at this level. So how would he handle the transfer portal? How would he handle NIL? You can always hire people to help bridge that gap and let Daboll just focus on coaching football. All right, there's a game this weekend. Penn State versus Michigan State. The Nittany Lions are 7.5-point favorites, but Michigan State, they might have a trick up their sleeves to make this game a little more difficult. We're going to talk about that next here. Expectations for this Penn State-Michigan State game. Land Grant Trophy's on the line. That's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot and an even bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Those bets can be used on anything, those bonus bets, whether that's NFL football, NBA basketball, college football. Lines are available for Penn State versus Michigan State. Penn State is a 7.5-point favorite, minus 300 on the money line, plus 245 if you're thinking Michigan State for the upset. The total is set at 49.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them over at FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. And remember, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Can Penn State finally get a Big Ten Conference win and maintain control of the land-grant trophy, right? That's what we're all concerned about. National TV, 3:30 CBS, 3:30 Eastern time on CBS. Crazy to think with 2, 3, and 6 teams playing one another. But Penn State is a 7.5 point favorite for a reason. This is a favorable matchup for Penn State. Michigan State doesn't have a lot going for them. Penn State's still objectively the more talented team, which even though these two teams have the same record, they're not the same even on paper. But again, you do have to consider other things. Michigan State might roll out something that we haven't seen all season long from them. And Andy Kotelnicki might be jealous here. A 2-quarterback system. Yes, that is the trick up their sleeve. A 2-quarterback system, because they got a lot of good play from Alessio Milivojevic, backup quarterback, because Aiden Childs, he was supposed to take this team at least a step forward. Michigan State under Jonathan Smith in year 2. This was supposed to be a better situation, and it never materialized to that. And Childs even got benched for Milivojevic. Milivojevic can throw the football. The thing with Michigan State's offense, though, is their offensive line doesn't do anything well. So it benefits them to actually rotate in both quarterbacks, because Penn State's defense still doesn't understand the concept of a quarterback spy. And, trying to make light of the situation, but it feels like that at times. That Jim Knowles is just so reluctant to run a quarterback spy when it makes sense. It cost them against Indiana. It really cost them against UCLA. Northwestern was able to make plays with it. Same with Ohio State. Basically, any quarterback that can somewhat move, as long as they are not a statue, they were able to have big explosive plays against Penn State's defense. And if you're Michigan State, you need to strategically capitalize on that. So my anticipation is, if Jonathan Smith is coaching for his job, if Michigan State actually wants to get a conference win themselves, they need to add this wrinkle, because it forces Penn State to at least acknowledge and game plan for both quarterbacks, because they're different. Milivojevic can throw the rock. He is a very talented passer, but Childs, much better athlete. So since Penn State, even when the quarterback run is coming, the defense still doesn't have an answer for it. So if you rotate in Aiden Childs and you basically strategically, you alternate between the two of them, Michigan State could put up some points on the board. I'm expecting a lot of points in this game, and a lot in respect. Penn State has now faced a number 1 Ohio State defense, a top 5 Iowa defense, and a top 10 Indiana defense in 3 consecutive games with a first-time starting quarterback. And we actually finally saw significant progress from the offense against Indiana. It finally took that step forward. Well, Michigan State doesn't know how to play defense this season. That minus 7.5 for Penn State, that plus 7.5 for Michigan State, in my mind, is an airtight line. Where I think Penn State is, where if you're looking for, hey, what can I, how can I attack this game from a betting perspective? Penn State's team total, because I could see this game going into a shootout type of situation where Penn State and Michigan State are just trading touchdowns. But in terms of favorability, Penn State, that Michigan State offensive line is an issue. And if they're not going to add this wrinkle to the playbook, then Jim Knowles can rush 4 or 5 players and let the coverage on the back end do the rest. And then I don't care how talented of a passer Milivojevic is. If Michigan State is not willing to add this wrinkle and maximize both what you have with Childs and Milivojevic, then Penn State and Jim Knowles' defense should actually look significantly better than what it's been, because Michigan State's offensive line can't hold up. But I said the same thing about UCLA. Yeah, Penn State, this will be a game where they might sleepwalk into, but UCLA's offensive line is so terrible that Penn State, isn't at as much of a risk as an upset. Well, hindsight's 2020. That was obviously a right idea, but wrong result, right? Because it was there. A similar case could be said for this game. Is Penn State going to sleepwalk into East Lansing, because it was another emotional, demoralizing loss for this team? And it's just, at this point, what is the point? Well, the Land Grant Trophy, of course, that should keep them motivated. But no, I like the way that Terry Smith has kept this team together. It really is about mental fortitude. Because if Penn State's not going to have the right mindset going into this game, then no, you're not even going to beat Michigan State. But this team's more talented. There are favorable matchups in this instance. Michigan State's defense just can't. Joe Rossi, defensive coordinator, I don't think he has the personnel. The Spartans just can't stop anybody on offense from the opponent's offense. So I expect Penn State to put up at least 30 points in this game. Can Michigan State match them step for step? Potentially if they get creative. So that's the trick up their sleeve if they are going to actually run it. If they don't, well, then Penn State should win this game pretty comfortably. But I am anticipating Penn State to score potentially 4 or 5 touchdowns in this game, at least, because this offense feels like it is ready to have a serious breakthrough. If you were able to have the success that you did against a top 10 Indiana team, what about a bottom 10, a top 10 Indiana defense, that is? What about a bottom 10 Michigan State defense? Yeah, Penn State shouldn't have any issues moving the football when Grunkemeyer looks so much better. Nicholas Singleton finally had that get-back game. You now have that two-headed monster at running back materializing again with Katron Allen. The wide receivers, Kobe Howard, Tysier Denmark starting to emerge in the rotation. Trevor Pena, the offensive line's playing better. The offense finally is coming together for what it is worth. And we'll see it unfold in East Lansing against Michigan State tomorrow. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Appreciate each and every one of you checking out this episode. If you are new, we talk about all your favorite Penn State sports teams, in-depth coverage around football, wrestling. We'll talk recruiting as well, basketball, hockey, you name it. It is all right here on Locked On Nittany Lions.